We just want to thank a few people. First off, Aaron Wagner, who found these lovely ladies and their exhibit and at the Birthplace of Country Music, which we found in the fall, but the exhibit just opened last night. So we also want to thank Design Lab for making our very cool poster, if you haven't seen it. And then we also want to thank the Cook-Cole College for Arts and Sciences, especially Dean Byrne and Lisa Seamster, who has done most of the logistics for today. So I'm going to introduce Toni Doman Van Dyke, who's here behind me. She's had various roles at the Birthplace of Country Music and currently works as the grants coordinator. Since 2018, she's produced and hosted WBCM LP Radio Bristol program called Mountain Song and Story, which showcases influential Appalachian artists and traditions through in-depth interviews, music, and storytelling. She also earned her master's degree in communications and media arts and studies from Ohio University, focusing on Appalachian music and culture as the core of her graduate research. She's also one of the few students to earn the world's first four-year degree in traditional bluegrass music, offered at Glenville State University in West Virginia. Very good. Toni is also a comedian and a musician, performing in the duo Virginia West. Through all of her creative outlets, Toni aims to promote arts and culture for a greater understanding of the region.
And this is Dr. Rene Rodgers, who is the head curator at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum and was a member of the museum's original content team before it opened in 2014. With the Bristol Public Library's executive director, she co-hosts the monthly Radio Bristol Book Club program. And she also co-hosts the weekly Museum Talk radio program with other members of the curatorial team. Did I say that right? I'm not a historian. Rene earned her BA in Art History and Classics at the College of William and Mary, and her master's and PhD in Roman Archaeology at Durham University in England. Wow. She lived and worked in England for almost 2 decades, including in the publishing department of English Heritage, the UK government's statutory advisor on historic environment. Did I miss the line?
Nope, that's
okay, right. Her passion for women's history guided her master's and PhD work, which focused on the connection between gender and ideology in Roman private and public art, and has been integral to the development of the Ivan Dord Women in Old Time Music exhibit at BCMM. She's also a Bristol native and is proud to share the music and culture of her home region with a multitude of audiences.
Yay!
So please enjoy Ivan Dord. I'm going to come back over here and not be a mess.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for having us here. Based on my bio, you can imagine there's a really straight line between Roman archaeology and country music. But here's where I am, and I've been here for almost 10 years, and so we're really excited to share the story of our newest special exhibit and the content, the very important content about women in old time music, and also the connections between that and early country and bluegrass. As we said, the exhibit opened last night. It's open to the public today, and it will be at the museum through December 31st of this year, and then we are hoping to travel it to other regional venues. So please come down and visit us. It is definitely worth seeing. Both of us, because we opened the exhibit last night and we were exhausted, neither one of us remembered to bring our cards with us. So here are our contact details, and Melissa also has them, so if you do want to get in touch with us. And we also just wanted to share the Birthplace of Country Music's website, but also to let you know that there is a dedicated website to the entire exhibit called womeninoldtimemusic.com, which has a plethora of extra information and will continue to be updated throughout the life of the exhibit. And finally, I just wanted to give a couple of pictures from last night before we jump into the content. One is the one with several of us in front of the Etta Baker panel is several of the women that we actually interviewed. We interviewed 18 contemporary female musicians for this exhibit to get their perspectives on important women who have come before them, the women who have inspired them, all of those types of things, but also most importantly what they envision for the future of old time music, which was a really exciting commentary on what they see old time music can grow into. And so those were several of the women and a lot of the content team together. But just to give you an idea of a little bit of what the exhibit looks like. So first off, whenever you're doing an exhibit, you have to think really carefully about the parameters, because unfortunately there is only so much room on a panel, and there's so much room in a room for how many panels you can have. And so one of the first things we did was talk about our definition for the purposes of this exhibit of old time music. And I'll just read you what we put on our opening panel, which is old time music is described and experienced in different ways and for different purposes. But at its heart, old time is mountain folk music with strong ties to Appalachia and the diverse peoples who have called it home. While old time music has primarily been related to hillbilly music, that's the term for the early commercial country music, and its roots and branches can be found in the development of country and bluegrass, it is one of the melting pots of American culture connecting to multiple genres, influences, and instruments. You'll see this as we go through the exhibit. And then also just really quickly before we jump into the definition, as that was one of the questions we asked the women is, what is old time music to you? Is why are we focusing on women in the first place? And as with so many parts of history and so many parts of the public sphere in particular, the stories that we hear tend to be male dominated. The big events and people who did this and people who did that tend to be male actors that are talked about. The history books do not cover women as much, and so their achievements, their influences, their innovations tend to not be remembered or known as widely. So that is one of the reasons we wanted to do this exhibit, was to bring out those stories and to show those foundational women and the women who are carrying it on today. But one of the things we also wanted to be really clear with the exhibit is that we are very aware that we are telling still only one part of this story that is unheard, and that there are other marginalized and underrepresented communities that have not been part of this history. And so where it connects with the old time music story, we have brought those stories in, but we very much hope that this is a starting point and not the end point of these stories. But we're gonna just listen to a quick clip from some of the interviews.
Yeah, and this is a lot of different voices describing their definition of old time music.
How long can one endure?
I think old time music has such a wide definition.
Some people think old time music is popular songs of the old days, early country music. Those three words, old time music, encompass so many different things.
It's this big umbrella term. At its heart, what it's referring to is this music of rural North America that has its roots in fiddle and banjo music.
One of the oldest forms of music that's played in this country.
Traditional folk music.
The culmination of European and West African folk influences that sort of meshed and came together through immigration and the transatlantic slave trade.
Old time music's an oral tradition, so it's always evolving, and it's evolving now, and there are a lot of people playing it and stretching the edges.
Drawn from African American music, Native American music, European musics.
Inextricably linked to dance and to community functions.
There's a lot of dance component to it, and I grew up going to dances with my family, but they played a lot.
People, you go to their house and they get out their banjos and their fiddles and the doo-doo-doo. I love the old time, and it was brought down from one generation to another. It makes you want to dance.
Old time music is the music that moves your heart and makes you feel something, and for me, it's the music of my childhood and my life, and the music that came out of the hills and the hollers.
All right.
So that,
Just a little taste.
yes, it's about a 6 to 8 minute clip that is at the opening of the exhibit. One of the things we wanted to do with the exhibit at the beginning was also sort of talk about those foundational sort of moments in this history. And again, we've got a picture here from the exhibit. And we wanted to talk about the fact that this music has been in the Appalachian Mountains and in that part of the world for a very long time, and it's a carryover from like what was said in those definitions, from European immigration, from the transatlantic slave trade, those things coming together, Native American peoples, trade itself, and people bringing in different instruments. And part of that meant that the music that was being played here and sung here early on showed those different influences, but it became an interest of scholars. So for instance, there was a lot of people traveling around the Appalachian Mountains in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who were looking for this type of music to record. And I don't mean record like audio record, but to like write down the song lyrics, to try and trace where it came from. People like Cecil Sharp and Olive Dame Campbell are ones that you might have heard of. But the one that I wanted to talk to you about just really briefly is Catherine Jackson French. And she is the woman at the top of the Song Catching and Songsters panel. And the woman standing beside it is the woman who just wrote her biography. And she is a forgotten ballad hunter from Kentucky. And she was doing these song catching journeys into the mountains of Kentucky to find old ballads several years before Cecil Sharp and Olive Dame Campbell were doing that work. But her work was not published for over 100 years. She tried to get it published approximately 10 to 8 years before Cecil Sharp and Olive Dame Campbell got theirs published. But through a whole load of different issues that arose, from the most mundane to the ones that really exemplify why we're in Women's History Month right now, where there was a lot with her publisher of actually giving out the work that she had done to other authors to be released under their names because they didn't really believe that she had done the work themselves. Just roadblocks that were put in her way to not be able to publish at the time, and the use of her work by other people against, that was not allowed by her. She hadn't said that was okay. So it took 100 years for those ballads to actually be published. And she was also a woman who went to Columbia University. She was one of the first women to graduate from Columbia University. So having her story out there now with this biography by Elizabeth de Savino, and now she said it was just amazing to be able to see her heralded in this exhibit. But this was the type of work that was being done by both male and female collectors. But what's really interesting is that the people that they were talking to find these ballads, again, it was primarily women. When Cecil Sharp did his collecting, probably 3/4 of those ballads were coming from women, and of those three quarters, a lot of them were by one particular woman, Jane Hicks Gentry, remembering those old ballads that were being passed down through her family and her community. The problem with what was going on during this song catching period was that there was a fairly narrow view of what kind of music was worth recording and worth studying. Very Eurocentric once again, so it tended to be the ballads from the British Isles. So other community groups and other oral traditions that were in the mountains, say from African American communities, Native American communities, weren't valued in the same way, and so they tended not to be recorded. And so that is an area where we don't have as much information. One of the other aspects of this is the preservationist side. So not only that they were preserving it back during the song catching sort of period. And that of course went on with people like Alan Lomax and other, the Seegers who were going back to do those field recordings, but also women who were doing work later down the line. And you'll see in this slide, Jeanette Carter at the Carter Fold in Hiltons, Virginia, who established the Carter Fold after her father, A.P. Carter, died, of the original Carter family, because she had promised him to help to preserve the music. And the Carter Fold has been instrumental in that, and it has grown into this amazing memorial music center that has new acts and new old time and bluegrass musicians every Saturday night, has a museum to the Carter family, has the A.P. Carter cabin restored and placed there. And her daughter, Rita Forrester, is still carrying on that tradition today. I think we have one one more slide. Yep. And then, of course, the women themselves who were making the music in these early days, especially the early 1900s, who were sort of the foundational acts for this music. The Carter family is the obvious one. Here's AP, Sarah, and Maybelle. Also Samantha Bumgardner and Eva Davis. If you haven't heard of them, they were actually the first women to record what was called hillbilly music, early country music, old-time music. As far as we know, they're the first women to ever record that music. They did so in 1924. They went up to New York City and recorded about 10 to 12 different sides, a combination of some of them singing together, some on their own. What's really interesting is Samantha Bumgardner actually recorded 2 songs by herself that were square dance numbers that included her calling the dance steps. So not just playing the actual instrumental side of it, but calling the dance steps, again, something that we don't associate with women. You tend to think of male callers with square dance steps. And then people like Lottie Kimbrough, who is seen in this drawing on the Kansas City Blues album. And this sort of illustrates that division between someone like Lottie Kimbrough, an African-American artist, would have been marketed as race records and blues music, whereas someone who might sing a very similar tune, there's quite a few blues songs in old-time music, but they were still marketed as hillbilly music for a white audience with white artists. But what's interesting about Lottie Kimbrough is that some of her early songs had the hallmarks of old-time music. So yodeling, which became popular after Jimmy Rodgers recorded in 1927 at the Bristol Sessions. That was not a normal thing to find in the blues. And also the use of the banjo. Even though the banjo was originally a West African instrument and has come from the African American tradition, it wasn't very common in early blues music. So her records have that sort of country blues melding or meshing together of those different influences. And then finally, the Bowman sisters. I wanted to bring them up because, again, they're not very well known, but they were one of the early recorders or early female recording artists. They recorded at the Johnson City Sessions in 1929 and 1930. They were teenagers when they did this. They traveled with their father, fiddlin' Charlie Bowman. They spent about 2 years on the vaudeville circuit, traveling all up and down the East Coast. In 1 year alone, Jenny Bowman recorded that they had done about 249 shows in 1 year on that traveling vaudeville circuit. They were so popular that they got invited to do a Colgate commercial for the toothpaste, but because their dad didn't come and pick them up in the car, they didn't get a chance to be in the commercial. Jenny Bowman was also invited to be the lead star of a movie with Gene Autry, but because she was pregnant with her first child, she was unable to take that opportunity. So they're an interesting story of people who are really prolific with performing live in particular. They did record, like I said, at the Johnson City Sessions and then one other set of sessions that didn't actually get released. But most of their sort of old-time connections are through live performance. But because of life circumstance, again, and just bad luck, some of it, they didn't get to make that commercial leap to television or, not television, to film and that type of thing. And they didn't go beyond to recording. Pauline actually gave up her music and ended up running a restaurant called the Green Bean. Jenny did keep performing for many, many years, but again, it was mostly local after that. But again, just one of these wonderful early hillbilly acts that not a lot of people know about.
Yeah, and so Rene just mentioned some challenges there that the Bowman sisters had to experience in their limits to commercial success. And that brings us into our next section of the exhibit, which is all about those challenges. So women have historically faced, and they really do continue to face, a multitude of challenges that can limit that opportunity to even have commercial success in the first place. And this is true, as you probably all well know, a room full of women. This is true in not just the music industry, and this is true historically, right? So women's stories have also been left out, not recognized, and sometimes overshadowed by their male counterparts. And when we're talking about challenges, I mean, this can be anything from just family limitations, or just having the space and the time to even be out there on the road performing. So pregnancy and motherhood, that's something that is physically letting you, or kind of forcing you to be in one place at one time. It's not allowing you the space and that opportunity to be out there on the road performing. So men were able to just have a little bit more freedom, and this is historically, and these are challenges that women still face today. right? So some other factors that play a role in limiting access to commercial or career success that women have faced historically. Homemaking responsibilities too, not just being a mother, just being the person that is at home in this space, having to do this job right here. Assumptions about gender roles, financial inequalities, bias and discrimination, and honestly just having fewer opportunities to even perform and record in the first place. So all of these things have just been experienced by women, and they're still being experienced by women in some ways. And through all of our interviews, it seems when we got to the challenges question and we were asking women, what challenges have you experienced? All of them had stories to share, but all of them also said, it's getting better, but it still has a long way to go. We still have a long way to go. So I'd like to play a little clip now of part of our interviews of some women that we spoke with for this section. And so you can hear some of their stories in their own words. And of course, this is longer than just 3 minutes, but I'll play a little bit of it for you. I'm just gonna skip ahead.
Historically, we haven't done a great job of telling the stories of women in old-time music, even though they've always been there. And of course, we have a responsibility today to bring those stories to light and also to celebrate the stories that we're writing today that also involve marginalized voices in old-time music.
Women were not being respected. They were being ordered around by men. This is what you're going to sing. This is how it's going to work.
Elizabeth Cotton stopped playing guitar for 25 years. When she turned 17 and got married and had a kid, she just stopped playing guitar altogether.
Etta Baker didn't put up with any of that foolishness either. She would call somebody on it. She'd say, Lord, honey, I have been around so long, how could you call me a girl?
It wasn't uncommon to be at a festival, a folk festival or a bluegrass festival, and have somebody come up to me and say, wow, pretty good for a girl. Oh my goodness, you're playing banjo. Look, it's a girl and she's playing bluegrass banjo. Why would it be the case that men could have assumed, or sometimes still assume, that women couldn't play? Couldn't play a hot bluegrass lick, couldn't play a hot flat pick guitar, couldn't keep up with a bluegrass band or an old time band or whatever. And I think that, in fact, I think you have to ask men that question. Why? Because it's not women who thought they couldn't do it. And I also think, again, there's a long-term process of education. I'm sorry, but men have been brought up to believe that they could be better at almost anything until recent times. And in every job, women have had to prove their worth. Women have had to prove their abilities, right? It's not just music, it's everything.
Any kind of business, any kind of religion, even politics. It's a misogynistic world that we live in. Men are just the ones that receive the awards and all of the praise and glory. It hadn't changed from the time that my mother was a girl. It's still exactly the same way as when she was a girl, and she was born in 1916. So I do know that I've got 2 cousins who are pharmacists. One's male, one's female, and he makes more money than she does just because he's a man, and that she does the same exact job. So it's pretty prevalent throughout our society, so why would it be any different in old time music?
I think one thing that's interesting about that video too is with Kathy Fink when she was talking about being told, wow, a woman, how are you playing the banjo so well? Is that there's so many stories though about, when we were talking about the women, the foundational women, there's so many stories from families about, oh, I learned banjo or I learned fiddle from my mother or my grandmother or my aunt. And she was known as having like these amazing banjo licks. So there's a family sort of lore that goes around that is based in reality, but there's still this sort of disconnect when you see someone performing publicly, I think.
And then you also heard Sheila K. Adams there talking about Etta Baker didn't put up with any of that foolishness. I love that line when she says that. But Sheila K. Adams is a ballad singer. She's been playing music for decades. She has she's a National Heritage Fellow, I believe. So she has a great story that's also in the exhibit when we talk about pay inequalities, because this is still an issue that women are still facing, right? But she has a story later on in this video where she's talking about women being contracted for a certain amount, but then still not being paid that much. And that happened to her, and like these sort of stories, just, it's a shame that we still have to hear about them. It's a shame that it's surprising that, oh, you're contracted to be paid this much and you're not. You still have to ask for it. It gets you fired up, I gotta say. And so also in the exhibit, we've also kind of included some kind of historical markers, at least on this section, to talk about financial inequalities outside of old time music. So today, the average female worker earns 82 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And it's often lower when race and other factors are taken into consideration. And the gap is even larger in the music industry at around 70 cents to every dollar a male musician makes, which is just like, again, it gets you fired up. Yeah. And also, something else to put into perspective, of course, women are still facing these challenges, but women didn't even have the legal right to own a bank account until the 1960s. And they couldn't open a credit card in their own name until 1974, which is really just wild to think about. I mean, this is not that long ago. So it was speaking with some of those general challenges specific to music. Double standards are also really prevalent in the music industry and what a lot of women have historically faced. One example that I like but I don't like is that of Lily Mae Ledford and the Coon Creek Girls. So early barn dance country radio star, got her start in the 30s and 40s playing music. And what record producers did was they really kind of crafted an image of what they thought that audiences wanted to hear. So maybe they just had full control over women who were performing. Sometimes women weren't even in control of the songs they were singing. They were told, here's what you're gonna sing. Like Kathy Fink was saying, this is what you're gonna wear, here's what you're gonna sing. And it took a really long time for women to get out of that, to have control. I mean, whenever the record producers are at this time, no women were the ones that were having these jobs as record producers, right? We're still having trouble getting there. But John Lair was a record producer for WLS, and he was instrumental in kind of curating images of women. And one example of a lesser known woman that was one of the early female barn dance stars was, oh my gosh, her name just escaped. Linda Parker. Yes. And John Lair, Linda Parker was a made up name. Her name was Jean Ann Munich. It was kind of this whole crafted story where they portrayed this Southern girl from Kentucky, but she was from, I think, Indiana. It was from the Midwest. So she never even lived in the rural South. But the image that she was being portrayed, the character that she was being made to be successful and to be on the radio was that of this, like, what their rural white audiences wanted to hear, what the record producers thought that their rural audiences wanted to hear. Often they didn't even have a way to track that data. They just assumed this is who was listening. So John Lair actually also was the producer for Lily Mae Ledford, did the same thing. Lily Mae Ledford and the Coon Creek Girls. Coon Creek was a fictional place. It was supposed to be a town in Kentucky that did not exist. So they also changed all the names of the women in the band. There were 4 women in the band, 2 sisters and 2 other friends that they had a group that played music. They changed all of their names to wildflower names, so like Daisy, Lily. I think her name might have
Violet. Violet was one of them.
Violet. It's so interesting. This is what you need to portray. It's more feminine. There's a story about Lily Mae Ledford being kind of forced to wear these like calico dresses, like gingham dresses, and she didn't feel pretty in them, but she had just done it so long that she just went along with it and wore what kind of she was told. So, and again, historically, it's taken a long time to kind of have women be in charge of their own voice and be in charge of what they're singing. You can look at all those early barn dance stars being told what to wear and what to sing. And then you can even go down and look at more country music, like Loretta Lynn singing about really risque topics at the time, like the song about the pill was just too wild for for just your generalized audiences. And now you have women who are still writing their own songs and still struggling to get their perspective even to be marketable. And then another story just about challenges that, again, I love but I hate, is that of the girls of the Golden West. Again, this is more country, but these are genres, terms for genres. We're talking about old time music, but so many things overlap here. The girls of the Golden West were originally named Mildred and Dorothy Goad. That was their names. But record producers encouraged them to change their names to Mildred and Dorothy Good, just to portray a high morality, now you're the good sisters. You guys are good. You ladies are good now. You're not, this name Goad isn't as attractive. So it's just all of these little stories that have been collected that we're featuring in this exhibit just make you just, ooh, it gets you fired up. And then another great story that's highlighted in this section is that of Ronnie Stoneman. So Ronnie Stoneman was the daughter of Hattie Stoneman. Hattie Stoneman was married to Pop Stoneman, who played at the Bristol Sessions back in 1927. She was one of 23 children. 23 children, yeah. One of 23 children.
3 sets of twins, I found out last night.
Yes, just incredible. Ronnie is still living. She was a cast member on the show Hee Haw. We interviewed her, and she shared a story with us about and she's a banjo player. She was in a banjo contest at a festival, and she was clearly the best, clearly the winner of the contest. And they pulled her backstage, her and all the male judges said, "Ronnie, we can't let a girl win this contest. They will tear this park apart." And then somebody had an idea to put them behind a curtain and have the judges decide, and they wouldn't do it because they were like, "Nope, we just can't let a girl win." And the winner of the contest was supposed to get a new banjo. And in her story, in her own words, she talks about just needing that banjo so bad because she's a musician. She had small children, like she had a no-account husband, according to her. So she needed that banjo, and they just wouldn't give it to her. So yeah, this section especially highlights a lot of those more stories like that. But those are a few that I like.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think also when Toni was talking about the statistics of the realities of when women got access to their finances is that even if you were a commercial success before that, you're not in control of your finances because you're not able to open your own bank account. You're not able to do those things to have that control over the money necessarily. So I feel like, even if you are actually making a success of yourself, if you have a family member, if your family isn't allowing you to take the control of your own money, then you're pretty much not going to have that chance. And I like one of the things we did try and bring this up to the present, and there's a clip, and you probably have seen it you can Google it, of Taylor Swift in an interview with CBS Today, where she's talking about the double standards for women, and her quote is, "There's a different vocabulary for men and women in the music industry. A man does something, it's strategic. A woman does the same thing, it's calculated. A man is allowed to react, a woman can only overreact." So just that sort of double standard of what behavior looks like when you're a woman as opposed to what it looks like with men. And I'm sure all of us have perhaps experienced that before, so.
Okay, and then the next section of our exhibit is really featuring, really the entire exhibit features all these hidden stories but we titled this one Hidden Heroines, from contest winners to iconic musicians. And the first story that I'd like to talk about, our first woman I'd like to talk about in this section is Elsie McWilliams. Elsie McWilliams was the first woman to actually have a career in the commercial music industry. She wrote over 20 songs for Jimmy Rodgers. And she was the cousin of Jimmy Rodgers' wife.
No, she was her sister, Carrie's sister.
She was her, sister-in-law. She was Jimmy Rodgers' sister-in-law. Yes. And it's also sort of sad because she never got any, she didn't want copyright on some of the songs. So she didn't really get a lot out of, I mean, Jimmie Rodgers is known as the father of country music. I mean, it's really sad when you think about it. I read an interview of her where she was talking to, the interviewee and just saying, she just kind of gave all of her money away. And, I wrote that one, but I'm not on it, but I wrote it. And it's like, you just go, wow, it just makes you, again.
Yeah. And she actually traveled. I mean, he would call on her to come and help him when he needed new songs, because that was the only way to make money back then, was to keep churning out the songs continually.
Yeah, and I didn't even know that he had someone write songs for him. I thought that he wrote all of his songs. So to find out through this entire process, to find Elsie McWilliams, oh my gosh, she wrote almost all of his songs is really, And then do you want to talk about Hattie Stoneman a little bit, since we mentioned her?
So Hattie is an interesting one, and because she was really instrumental in Pop Stoneman going to record for the first time. Like Toni said, she was having babies a lot from the time they got married for several years. But when Pop Stoneman first wanted to go record, he had heard another musician, Henry Wetter, who was one of the early hillbilly musicians, on a record at a furniture store, and he came home and he said to Hattie, I could sing better than that Henry Wetter. He's no good. And she's like, she didn't say you need to put your money where your mouth is, but she essentially said that and said, if you think that's true, then you need to go do something about it, and sort of gave him that support and that sort of spark to go and actually record. And he ended up, before the 1927 Bristol sessions, he had recorded 80 to 100 songs already. But then later, after, the sad thing about the Stonemans is that they were very successful in those early years. His first recording was in 1924. They were the most prolific recordings at both the 1927 and the 1928 sessions, and he recorded in several other sessions in other places like Jeanette Records in Indiana. But then the Depression hit, and they were very hard hit. I mean, you have 23 children, 13 of which made it to adulthood, so lots of tragedy. The Depression, he had to give up music and travel away from the family continually to get paid during the Depression, and Hattie was left alone to care for the children by herself in Galax, Virginia. But then after they got through the Depression and they were back together up and living in Northern Virginia and Maryland, in the 1960s, I believe, or maybe late 1950s, 1960s, again, there was a contest to get a short recording contract, and Pop wanted to go enter it, but his sons wouldn't go play with him because they thought he was too old-fashioned. And so Hattie got mad, and she was like, well, we're going to go out there and we're going to outplay those boys, and they beat them and got the contract. So again, it's just these interesting stories of sometimes these hidden, and you don't hear about Hattie very much, even though she was on a lot of the recordings with Pop. She has these really cool sort of spark moments with him, but you don't hear about her very much.
And Rene wrote a really great blog post about Hattie Stoneman specifically a few years ago, and Ronnie Stoneman was thrilled because, it's like she's finally getting some recognition. And then Louise Scruggs, if that's, again, probably a name you don't recognize, but
I recognize the last name at least.
Scruggs, yeah. So yes, her husband was Earl Scruggs, but she was his manager and did so much for him in her entire life. Booking manager after Flatt and Scruggs broke up. And I mean, this is her tombstone, and just look at all the awards that are listed there. I mean, it's a paragraph. So it's really exciting to have, someone who was so instrumental in booking someone. She had the first career as a female booking agent. That is something that she did. She wasn't just Earl Scruggs' wife. She had the first career as a female booking agent. She created her own booking company, management company. And her tombstone doesn't say wife of Earl Scruggs. It says, here are all my awards. So we really loved that when we went to visit her tombstone, which is in Nashville at Spring Hill Cemetery. Like, all of the country music stars are all buried in this kind of like elite cemetery, and you can go around and read all these wonderful tombstones if you're into that. But
I mean, Jenny Lou Carson is my favorite hidden heroine. Again, someone I knew very little about before we started doing this research, but Jenny Lou Carson is the first woman to have a #1 country hit. She was a prolific songwriter. Between 1945 and 1955, she was probably one of the most prolific country music songwriters in the business. She wrote over 170 different songs. Has anyone heard of Jenny Lou Carson? No. I mean, she's not very well known, but what's really interesting about her, she got started as a teenager, young adult, on the WLS barn dance, as National Barn Dance, as part of a trio with her 2 other sisters, the Three Little Maids, they were called. Probably very much curated, like Toni was talking about with Lily Mae Ledford and Linda Parker. She then branched out on her own. She went through several different personas during her career until she landed on Jenny Lou Carson. And her real name was Virginia Lucille Overstock. But she sang briefly with the Sweet Violet Boys and did something again very unusual in old time music where she sang they recorded 2 or 3 quite risque songs, which was not an acceptable thing for a white woman to do at that time. And it certainly wasn't something that happened in old time music very often. She then also created an Annie Oakley type persona where she did some gun tricks and some lassoing and that kind of thing, sort of cowgirl. And then in the end, as Jenny Lou Carson. And one of her songs, Let Me Go Lover, was actually originally called Let Me Go Devil, and it was about alcoholism, and it was based on the story of Hank Williams. But the publishing or the music publishing company didn't think that was, again, they thought, A, it was too depressing, but they also thought it wasn't necessarily an appropriate song for a woman to sing. So they convinced her to change it to Let Me Go Lover, and it became a really popular sort of broken heart song that was recorded by numerous and covered by numerous different artists. So I really like her story because it's sort of, she steps outside the box a lot. She was married about 4 times, I think. Yeah. She just sort of lived life her own way and made a success of it.
And she's not the only one that was kind of forced to change, lyrics. Even in those early, going backwards a little bit, even all of the early country barn dance stars, I mean, this is like the 30s, 40s, it's the Depression. The record producers didn't even want women to sing, like Rene said, any depressing things. We want you to uplift our listeners. So she's not the only one that was encouraged to do so, to not sing and change the lyrics. And here are a couple images of some individuals we just talked about. Hattie Stoneman there, Lily Mae Ledford, and Cousin Emmy.
Cousin Emmy is a great story too because she played music young. Again, she's someone who mastered most of these women, just like most musicians in old time music, are multi-instrumentalists. But she played all sorts of different things, including the musical saw, and was on Pete Seeger's Rainbow Quest playing a rubber glove.
And she's also playing 2 instruments there, if you can tell.
Yes, the fiddle and the banjo. But she was both a comedian, like Toni, a comedian and a musician. She was on the barn dance. She was on numerous radio shows and radio stations. In 1935, she won the National Old Time Fiddlers Contest. But she also influenced Grandpa Jones, who is a huge country music star, on the Grand Ole Opry and on Hee Haw, and taught him how to play banjo the clawhammer style, which is the old time style, and also convinced him to develop that persona, to further develop the persona of Grandpa Jones because of sort of the connections that he could make between music and comedy. So she continued on playing for quite a long time from when she started on the barn dance in the 1930s. But I just really like her too because she, again, feels like she was one of the people who lived her life on her own terms. And I think one of her quotes is that she's probably one of the only hillbillies with a Cadillac from the money she made.
And, it's also really interesting. A lot of the women we talked to actually knew some of these women. I mean, obviously, Ronnie Stoneman, that's her mother. Lily Mae Ledford, Kathy Fink, who you saw earlier in the Challenges video. Kathy is an educator, an old-time musician. She got to interview Lily Mae Ledford, who was a big deal. I mean, in her time, she was a big deal. Kathy got to interview her when she was in her 30s, and there's a great video on YouTube of her interviewing her about her life. So it's great that we were able to interview Kathy. Same thing with Cousin Emmy. Alice Gerard, who's a hugely influential ballad singer and played with Hazel Dickens for many years. She had stories about knowing Cousin Emmy. So it's this music, old-time country music, bluegrass, all of these genres, they're not that long ago along the timeline of things. So we're only about one generation or two removed of people that were living it. And sometimes those people that are still, those people are still here too, which is amazing.
Yes. And we'll skip Maybelle Carter since we've talked about the Carter family a little bit, because I do want us to talk really quickly about Elizabeth Cotten. And Elizabeth Cotten, and every time her name is with an E, Cotten with an E at the end, but the computer doesn't believe me. I didn't catch that it changed it back. But Elizabeth Cotten, again, she taught herself to play left-handed and upside down because she was a left-handed player. But she played in a very distinctive style. She composed Freight Train, her most famous song, when she was only 12 years old. But she married at 15 and gave up music, like one of our interviewees, Amethyst Kia, said, for 20, 25 years once she got married. Didn't play at all, put her guitar away. And it wasn't until her husband had passed away and she was working as a domestic for the Seeger family, and she picked up one of their guitars and was playing it, and one of the Seeger family members walked in while she was playing and were just like blown away by how good she was. And they encouraged her to keep playing, and they helped her to get out onto the urban folk revival circuit. She ended up winning a Grammy at the age of 90 for her work, and is hugely influential. Her very distinctive style of guitar playing is hugely instrumental. But she's a great example, again, of that crossover, where there is an assumption that there isn't a crossover between African American musical traditions and white rural music traditions, but there is a lot of crossover. So she is also hugely influential in old time music. So she's a great example for that.
And I know we're running out of time here. How much time do we have left? Probably hit 45 minutes.
Yeah, maybe like 10.
Okay. Okay, I won't rush now. So another thing about old time music is, of course, participation and community. That is at the foundation of playing music, is playing music together. Historically, that's how this music was played. In the homes, it was played socially. Before we had radio and all of the media that we have now to be so connected. That is at the heart of old time music. So participation, community, front porches, that's where this music was played, living rooms, jam sessions, fiddlers conventions, workshops. Today it's carried on by camps, educational programs. There are so many universities, high school clubs, so many places that this music is being played and still carried on, the traditions. With traditions comes always I think maybe a little bit of hesitation with, this is traditional, we got to keep it this way. But there are also innovators that are out there playing this music and making it their own, which historically has always been. When you think of tradition, maybe you don't think of innovation. I know that's what I often hear by people is, we got to keep it in a box, sort of set parameters on a genre. But old time music in its heyday, whenever it was the 1930s and 40s, even before that, was influenced by the sounds of the people around that were playing it. So, of course, it's going to continue to be influenced today. So something that we highlight in the exhibit is just that. Where is old-time music going? Who are the innovators right now? So we with our interviews, we interviewed a lot of different people, right? We interviewed people who've been playing for 50 years. We interviewed younger people who are just coming into the scene. One of those younger people, which I would consider an innovator, is Nora Brown. Great, amazing banjo player. I don't know how old she is, but she's probably around 20, maybe a little younger. I know this is a small on the screen here, but Martha Spencer and Emily Spencer. Emily Spencer is Martha's mother. Martha is very young, and she just is steeped in Appalachian music traditions. Another innovator, person that's carrying it on. And then there's also, I'll skip ahead here before my video plays. Amethyst Kia, huge innovator. Amethyst went to ETSU and did the Bluegrass Old Time Music Studies program there. But
Amethyst is blowing up. She's huge now. She's doing all these great, amazing things, but her roots are steeped in old time music traditions. And we see that in changing the lyrics too of people whenever they're writing their own songs. So there's a ballad called John Henry. Of course, you probably know the story. John Henry's hammer working. We all know John Henry.
The steel driving man.
Steel driving man. Amethyst flipped the narrative on that song and wrote her own called Polly Ann's Hammer, which is about his wife and how hard she works. So, and there's also, you have women who are innovating things by flipping the narrative on maybe like murder ballads. Murder ballads are historically, who's the victim in a murder ballad? It's always women. It's always women. There is like one murder ballad that I know of where there's no male involved, and that's because a sister murders a sister. Okay, so it's always women. So women are so sick of being the victims. So Molly Tuttle, another great Americana musician, has a murder ballad where she flipped the narrative on that. I can't think of the name right now of the tune, but you have these innovators who are doing this, who are still going to carry on the traditions of this music, and that doesn't affect the roots of where it's coming from. In fact, I think it's adding to it. And then I'll go backwards here on touch base on Ola Belle Reed, who is one of the images on the poster here. Ola Belle Reed has been hugely influential to so many women. I think everyone we talked to and interviewed mentioned her as an influence. She's also the title, we used her song, I've Endured, as the title of our exhibit, I've Endured Women in Old Time Music, which has been recorded.
Colon.
Yeah.
The colon is important. Grammar matters.
Yes. But she was not only a songwriter, but she was a humanitarian, tradition bearer. She actually also changed her name from Ola Wave to Ola Belle because Belle was just really, it's like Southern Belle, makes it seem more country. So even she was not immune to record producers wanting her to change herself in some ways. But she has so many songs that are still being sung by contemporary musicians like, oh my gosh, what is it, Rene? It's not in my notes.
High on
a Mountain. Yes,
sorry.
It was recorded by Del McCurry and other contemporary musicians, but Ola Belle Reed, hugely influential for so many.
Yeah.
And if we have, do we have time to play, or should we just keep going? Play it? Okay. We'll play a quick clip of inspirations of women so you can hear it in their own voice. Some of their inspirations.
Women have played a huge part in the early recording of hillbilly and country music. Go back to August 1st, 1927, when the Carter family walked into the studio in Bristol for Victor Records, and Sarah Carter let loose, and the world of country music was forever changed. And to think that women are an important part or integral part of that music is just crazy.
I had a great-grandmother that was one whale of a banjo player. That's the way Granny put it.
Ever since I was, a baby, I guess my parents were playing music.
Elizabeth Cotton, Etta Baker, Maybelle Carter, Precious Bryant, and Rhiannon Giddens.
Lily Mae Ledford and the Coon Creek Girls, and then also Ola Belle Reed.
Growing up, there was always some strong female all-time musicians I like to, but I think even more so, we see more today. And I think there's also a really great thing of like women supporting women.
Well, Hazel Dickens was a powerful woman, and I loved her songwriting. I loved her voice. I loved everything about her. She was just so real.
Other living legends like Alice Gerrard, who's still around, and then peers that are like around my age or younger or a little older, folks like Brittany Goss and Tatiana Hargreaves and Alison DeGroot.
I love the fiddling of Emily Dickerson. I love Lily Mae Ledford. I love Rose Maddox. There's so many.
Trish Ford, we kind of take lessons off my mom when I was a kid, or Crystal Blevins, or I would see like the Bowmans, like Marsha Bowman, different people in the local community scene.
Emily Spencer, and I think the world of Emily. She was always so generous, with her music that
It really encouraged me and inspired me that maybe I could do it too.
Molly O'Day, great singer, banjo picker, kind of a driving style, would be an influence. Lily Mae Ledford, Carter Family.
Jean Ritchie. Her songs really moved me. She was singing about community.
Then Barbara Poole, who played with Larry Sigmund. I grew up seeing them dance in the old time music scene, and she was a great bass player, really unique style.
I was listening to the radio like everybody else was in the 60s, and Dolly Parton and Loretta Lynn, I think the two of them inspired all the girls there around home that ever had a thought about singing.
I know we could keep watching. I know I want to. But yeah, so many stories and so many different voices of influences of women.
And finally, just really quickly, I won't go into this in depth, but one of the things that we also wanted to talk about was how women have used their voices both as people, but also as musicians in the pursuit of social justice, progressive issues within their communities, looking out for their communities. And people that I would really encourage you to learn more about are Florence Reese. In 1931, she wrote "Whose Side Are You On?" after watching gun thugs from the coal mining operators come into her home looking for her husband to stop him from his union organizing activities. And she got so mad that she ripped down a calendar from the wall and wrote the lyrics to "Whose Side Are You On?", which is basically asking people to make a choice of, are you on the side of the person over here who's hurting our communities and our husbands and fathers and brothers, or are you on the side of the union that's trying to protect them? Hazel Dickens, who carried on that tradition, especially in coal mining communities, with many, many songs that have been used as anthems of that protest movement. And then later down the line, the Real World String Band, this is them at the Highlander Center in East Tennessee, which was a huge community organizing, or still is a huge community organizing center, especially in the civil rights and labor rights eras. And they have done a lot of concerts for causes that they believe in, from the environment to social justice to racial justice. And then finally, Rhiannon Giddens, who started out in the Carolina Chocolate Drops and is now a solo act and does so many things it's impossible to even name two or three of them without sort of getting lost in how much she does. But her album with three other banjo players, black banjo, female banjo players, including Amethyst Kia, who we mentioned a minute ago, The Songs of Our Native Daughters, is taking those old stories of African American women facing hardship from slavery, from Jim Crow, from today, and using the banjo and their voices and their music to sort of address those issues and sort of declare their presence in this world. So there's so much with using this music again to take it forward. And this is why we wanted to end with this image, because the very end of the exhibit is about the past, present, and future, and how many people are out there trying to share this music with young people, trying to, and looking beyond the stereotype of who those young people will be. And this is a wonderful organization out in California called Jam Pack that started out as a neighborhood organization for bluegrass and old time music and has grown into so much more than that. But that's one of their little band groups getting ready to play together.
And we do want to mention that we have a website. I will go to the last slide so you can write it down if you need to, but it's, again, womenatoldtimemusic.com, and it looks amazing. We're so proud of it. So that we have bios of all of the women and more that we'll be adding to this, because the exhibit, of course, just opened today. So all the women we've mentioned, names that we couldn't mention, obviously, in this discussion, and names that we couldn't even add in the exhibit because of limited space, are all going to be added on here.
Also, all of the videos will be uploaded in full, one a month. So all of those interviews that we did will be on there. We also have a Spotify playlist. All of the events, we're going to have an event one per month from now through December. So if you do want to come down, be sure and check out the events. They're not up there yet because everything sort of came down to the wire at the end. And there's 2 bits of the website that aren't live yet. But please come and visit us. We would love for you all to see this exhibit. It's been a labor of love for us.
Yes.
And passion. So yeah, that's it.
We have plenty of time for questions. If anyone wants to ask Rene and Toni a question.
God, making those choices must have been so.
So hard, yes.
Yes. I mean, and then not just making the choices at the beginning of the exhibit script, but then once it got in design and you decide, oh my God, we don't have room for 4 lines, who are we going to cut?
Yeah.
What are we going to cut? Which is, I mean, I'm glad that at the beginning we made we had decided very early in the process that we wanted to do this robust website so that we could deal with that. Because we knew we couldn't cover everyone. But the other thing that we've done in the exhibit is that as you leave, there's a panel that says, who did we miss? That people can put Post-its of people that they think. And the idea is that we can use that to then keep populating the website throughout. And this website will live beyond the exhibit. It will stay live. But also that when it travels to other regional and other communities, that hopefully they'll be able to supplement the exhibit with their own local stories that we might not know at all, and include that as part of the exhibit.
And this is also the first exhibit that we've created entirely in-house. So it's been just staff at Birthplace Country Music with an outside help from assistance from a content development team, which included a few people that you saw in there, Kalia Yeagle and Kathy Fink, which were in some of the videos we saw.
Which all started with research, interviewing.
Yes. Yes, and this is almost entirely grant funded, which is really exciting. We've got support from multiple grant funders. I mean, it was like over 40,000 in grant funding, which is like very exciting, and I'm so proud.
That's the first time we've been able to do that.
Yeah, so entirely created in-house, almost entirely grant funded. It feels good.
But when we first, the idea for it happened in 2017 or 2018, just sort of casually. One of my former colleagues just said, we should really do an exhibit one day on women in old time music. And I was like, yeah, we should. That's a great idea. But we didn't have the capacity at the time. We're a Smithsonian affiliated museum, and I went to the Smithsonian Affiliates Conference the next year, and they had an exhibit design and planning workshop where you were supposed to think up an exhibit that you'd really love to do, and then you were supposed to do these like exercises to like brainstorm some ideas for it. So I used that women in old time idea for that workshop, and it made me think about it a bit more. And then I guess it was 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, that we got put in our first grant application for it. So it's been a 2 years in the making thing, but a lot of conversation, a lot of research. Like I said, 18 different women that we interviewed, but we also then sent out questionnaires to other women and also some men in the industry. So like Ken Irwin at Rounder Records and Jeff Place at the Smithsonian to share some of their perspectives. It was really hard to stop writing and to stop researching.
Well, did you discover part of the way through that there were questions you wished you'd asked?
Oh gosh, yes.
Oh, yes.
For sure.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
One of the panels that we're going to do is going to be called Music as Work, and maybe we'll get to ask some of those questions there.
Yeah.
So a lot of music that will we be able to hear these individuals, some of their original songs, things like that?
Yeah, so we're working. That's the one thing we weren't able to get ready for last night because
that was a big issue, is the copyright. And we're a museum, so we are able to play certain things in the museum, but there are also limitations since it's a traveling exhibit. So what's on display is more it's more interview heavy, I would say, more content based, but the website's going to have more resources where you can actually hear.
Yeah. Like right now, the Spotify playlist probably already has about 35, 40 songs on it, and we're not done with it. We keep populating that. So, and we're trying to have something on an iPad in the exhibit where we can, at least while it's at our museum, people can listen to it. But it is tricky because as a music museum, we already have those permissions, but not every museum or site will be able to do that.
And there are a lot of archival things that we have collected that we were just at capacity and couldn't, create any more for what's on display. But again, those will be on the exhibit too. I mean, there's a great performance and interview with Olabelle Reed that we've got from somewhere that is wonderful.
Yeah.
And so many resources. Like I mentioned, that interview with Kathy Fink interviewing Lily Mae Ledford, and that's probably in 1980. Yeah. So there's so much media out there, and it's so exciting to go backwards and see this archival footage too that we'll have eventually on the website.
And that's one of the things that's about to go live on the website. The website also went live yesterday, so everything happened yesterday. The opening reception, the website went live.
And here you are.
Yeah. Well, when we agreed this date, we were supposed to open at the beginning of March, but several team members got hit by COVID early in January and the flu, and we had to push it back a little bit. And so we didn't necessarily intend to come up here the day after, but it's exciting for us to be able to tell you all about it on the day that it opens. But one of the parts of the website is going to be additional related resources. So it's going to have a bibliography. It's going to have films that you might want to watch. So we've put a lot of the Apple Shop films in particular on there because they've done a lot of films about women in music. And then probably in the next couple of months, we're also going to be adding a K through 12 lesson plan.
Oh, good.
So, yeah.
Well, the lyrics suffer the same issues with copyright as the.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we were hoping that we could play some of the 1920, that we could use some of the 1927 because they are just on the cusp of going into the public domain. But it also depends on if you're talking about the actual sheet music or if you're talking about the performance, and the performance didn't go in.
Yeah.
Because we were like, well, we could definitely then there's enough with some of the 1927 stuff that we could use that, but it was just, it's
all
still
that
not
copyright is so complicated, and
Yeah.
it's so, getting permission is even like scary to do anything wrong.
Yeah,
So.
and because we're a music museum, we already have to pay all those things for BMI and ASCAP and CSAC. But most museums are not having to do that. So
we did a lot in-house.
yes, yes, we did have because we do a lot of live performance as part of our programming. If we are using, besides the I've Endured song, a lot of the fiddle stuff that you heard was from our live performances for the radio and that type of thing, where it's our own recordings, and with the musicians that we work with all the time, and so
It must have been just emotionally difficult too, from like elation to despair.
Yes.
For that too.
Yeah.
So I'm coming at this from an English point of view, and you were talking about Appalachian music in the Appalachian region. I remember in the Shakespeare course when I was an undergraduate, they talked about how if you wanted to actually hear Elizabethan English that would be spoken by Shakespeare, you can actually hear it in Appalachia. In fact, in Hamlet, when Hamlet wants to murder his father-in-law, he says, "I can't do it because he's a praying."
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah, and so that held over when people came from England and they still had that Elizabethan language. So you can actually go there and listen to Elizabethan Shakespeare.
Well, and just the connections between those old ballads from the British Isles too are carrying some of that language over.
Those connections,
Yeah, we did an exhibit a few years back. Again, this was one that we brought in to the museum from an outside source about Cecil Sharp's travels in 1916 and 1918 in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia maybe. And Cecil Sharp has a few, there's some difficult things about that because he's one of those songcatchers who didn't value African American informants for the music. And there's a few things in his diaries that reflect that devaluing. But there's a song that, again, he was trying to find those connections between the songs that were being sung in Appalachia and the songs that originated in the British Isles. And there was one that originated in 17th century Scotland that you can now hear aspects of it in a recording on the 1927 Bristol sessions with the Carter family. And that's just crazy, from the 1600s to 1927. And it's really interesting, in Jenny Lou Carson's songbook, there's another song that isn't Storms Are on the Ocean, because the Storms Are on the Ocean is the song I'm talking about, that has that verse about who will shod my pretty little feet, who will glove my hand, which is this verse that is carried over time and time again from that ballad from the 1600s, which was pretty cool.
The ballads are all so old.
Yes.
It's like, it's not just decades, it's centuries.
Well, and like Sheila K. Adams is 7th or 8th generation ballad singer. Of that music being passed down from her family. Donna Ray Norton, also an 8th generation ballad singer.
And it's an oral tradition learned, and they call it knee to knee, where it's just you're repeating a word and phrase, and you're tapping your knees, repeating it in the same way until you get it exactly right. And you're like, watching them learn is really, I don't know what the word is, emotional? I don't know. There's so much connection there because they're like staring at each other and you feel like you're interfering if you're watching. But it's really, there's so much tradition in that. And it's great that people are carrying it on, and there's nothing wrong with innovating it either. You know, that's how it.
One of her
retains.
quotes in the future, which we didn't show that video, was Sheila Kay mentions that there's a few ladies now in ballad singing who will harmonize, which is not something that happens in old traditional ballad singing. She's like, I'll allow it.
Yeah.
She's like, I carried it into this century, and I'll let them carry it on to the next.
Oh, and the full interviews of all the women that we interviewed will eventually be on the website as well. So we obviously only had very limited space for the media that's in the exhibit, so we'll be releasing them once a month for.
The first one's going to be released on May 1st.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So if
Which
you.
one of you owns the banjo?
What's that?
Which one of you owns the banjo?
Owns the banjo.
Do you play?
Not the banjo very well.
I've tried to learn how to play the banjo, and it was not good for the ears.
I play more a guitar than banjo. I am learning, but always learning.
I would love to play the banjo. That's my aspirational instrument. One day when I have time to actually practice, maybe I'll learn.
Yeah.
Did you all get any pushback from anyone
About the topic?
about the exhibit? Like,
I
presume you.
We actually, not internally, certainly not internally. We've had a lot of support internally, but in anticipation of possible pushback, we have and don't forget, I've got to send that to the staff. Just remembered I was supposed to do that. We created talking points so that if a board member or a staff member was approached and said, because inevitably, we know what's social media is like. The minute you say that something's Women's History Month or women this, it's like, well, why isn't it Men's History Month and why isn't it men? Da, 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 da. So we've got something that addresses that. But also one of the really interesting parts of this exhibit, and Toni was trying to we tried to upload a little bit of the futures part of our media, where we asked them to envision the future of old time music. A lot of the people we talked to talked about how important it is for old time to continue to be more welcoming and open to other groups. And in particular, it was called out a couple of times about queer and trans artists. And anticipate, and that is in the exhibit, part of that clip is in there. And so we have created talking points for both of those things, especially because we are on the border of Tennessee, which is in the middle of quite a lot of legislating right now. But we wanted to be sure, because we wanted to make it clear what our process had been. So like that, those talking points talk about, we interviewed this many women, we asked everyone the same questions. These were organic conversations and organic research development without an agenda, because that's what people assume. But so far, last night, there was a really wide range of different types of people there, from older board members who are very traditional to some of the grantors, to young people that are in the music from ETSU, the East Tennessee State University Old Time Band was there. And we got a lot of really positive feedback, so hopefully it'll mostly be a positive experience.
You're all on the Virginia side.
Our museum is in Virginia, and our administrative office is in Tennessee. So,
it's a challenge.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
But, any other questions? Well, please plan to come down and visit us. The exhibit is there till the end of December. Like I said, we're going to have a plethora of really great programming throughout the year, at least one per month. We're going to have at least 2 books on our Radio Bristol Book Club that are related to the topic, and some of the things we do virtually, so you can also access some of them online. But yeah, we'd love to have you all down there.